cleaned the broker's office 6 nights a week. For 11 months before I understood what the machines in the back room actually did. That might sound slow, but when you are scrubbing for some floors at 2 in the morning, and you have a mother whose treatment costs more than your rent, you do not have much bandwidth left for philosophy. Put your head down. You finish the floor. You empty the waste baskets, and wipe the glass partitions, and maneuver your cart around the good furniture in the lobby, and you go home on the train before dawn, with your feet hurting, and your hands smelling of cleaning solution, and you sleep until early afternoon. And then you do it again. My name is Marin Solis. I was 29 years old. I pushed a cart. The Recollection Exchange occupied the 14th and 15th floors of a glass tower on the harbor. During the day, it looked like any other finance firm. Clean desks, hushed voices, young professionals in gray jackets moving between offices with the careful economy of people who understood that their time was monetized down to the quarter hour. The lobby had a water feature and real plants, and the kind of light that cost money to produce. At night, when I came in, it looked like a cathedral someone had converted into a hospital. Long corridors, white light, the faint smell of saline and something electrical that I never found a word for. The machines were in a sealed room I was not permitted to enter. I could hear them through the wall when I mopped the 15th floor corridor. A low, regular pulse, like breathing, like something very large in a slow and deliberate sleep. The exchange did was simple to explain and very hard to think about for long. They extracted memories, not copies, the actual neural encoding, the full sensory record, everything the brain had wrapped around a moment and kept. They liquefied it, cataloged it, priced it, and sold it to buyers who wanted to experience something they had never lived. Kiss. The smell of your grandmother's kitchen. The morning you stood on a summit and understood for 1 second that you were small, and the world was not. Those sold well. The experience of learning a skill from a parent, a trade, a recipe, the particular patience of being taught something by someone who loved you, sold well. Surprisingly well, too, they told me later. There was a market for people who want to feel something real and had forgotten how. They would buy a stranger's loss for an hour. They considered this an experience worth having. What the seller lost was the memory itself, not the knowledge that the event had happened. You kept the fact, the date, the name. You lost the living of it, the sensation, the emotional weight, the smell, the specific angle of the light, the physical register of the moment in your chest. It became a notation in a ledger where a room used to be. You knew the room had existed. You could describe its dimensions from the outside. You could not go back inside. I knew all of this because I read the intake pamphlets when I emptied the waiting room wastebaskets. They were written in a soft and careful language that worked very hard to avoid saying clearly what the process actually involved. I read them the way I read most things I found at that job, carefully, without drawing conclusions I wasn't prepared for. There was a lot at the exchange that I chose not to conclude things about. You make decisions about what you look at when the alternative is having nothing to look away from. The first dragon I ever saw was Emery. I did not know he was a dragon then. I thought he was a man. Late 40s, bronzed through the shoulders, with scaled skin the color of old bronze that I assumed was some kind of medical condition, and therefore none of my business. He wore a good coat and sat with the precise stillness of someone who had learned long ago that economy of movement attracted less attentions than its opposite. He was in the waiting room at 11:45 on a Thursday night, which was unusual, because the exchange closed to clients at 9. I nearly walked past him with my cart. He spoke first. "You work late," he said. "So do you," I said, and kept walking. He was there again the following Thursday, and the one after that. He never seemed to use the intake desk. He never filled out forms. He just sat in the waiting room, reading a paper document, actual paper, which nobody used, and occasionally looking toward the sealed room at the end of the hall where the machine breathed its slow breath. I noticed he never looked at his hands. People with visible physical differences usually either look at their hands constantly or never. He was the second kind. There was something old and settled in the way he existed in the room. He occupied the chair like a man who had been waiting in a great many chairs for a great many years and had made his peace with it. The third Thursday I brought him coffee. Not because it was my job. It was cold in that waiting room, and he had been sitting there for 2 hours, and the exchange's lobby staff had gone home, and nobody else was going to bring him anything. I had an extra cup. I made 2 when I made my own, out of habit from the restaurant work, where you always made 2 because someone was always about to need one. He looked at the cup for a moment as though he was trying to remember the protocol for receiving gifts. The pause lasted long enough that I wondered if I had misread the situation. If perhaps he didn't drink coffee. If I had done something socially inexact. "Thank you," he said. He said it with a weight that seemed disproportionate to the coffee, not effusive, the opposite, careful. As though gratitude was something he measured. "You're welcome," I said, and went back to mopping. That was the whole of it. I did not think about it again. I had enough to think about. The situation with my mother worsened in December. The treatment for what she had was not experimental. It had been standard practice for 6 years, well documented. Effective in the majority of cases when administered consistently and at the right intervals. But the insurance classification had shifted 18 months earlier, following a legislative adjustment that nobody in her situation had been warned about, and now her treatment sat in a category that required a supplemental policy we had never been able to afford and had never thought to need. The gap between what her coverage paid and what the clinic charged had been manageable when I had 2 jobs. When the restaurant cut my hours in November, not a firing, just a reduction, the kind of polite diminishment that saves a company money without requiring it to state that plainly, the gap became a wall. My supervisor at the exchange was a thin, efficient man named David, who wore the same navy tie every day and communicated primarily through small sighs. The sighs were not expressive. They were administrative, like the brief acknowledgement sounds a machine makes when it has processed an input. He called me into his office on a Tuesday in early December and told me that the exchange offered a supplemental benefits program to long-term cleaning staff. I had been there 11 months, not 12, so I did not technically qualify. He was telling me this, he said, because he had noticed I was reliable, and reliability was worth something, and he wanted to give me the information in advance so I could make a plan. He did not look at me while he said this. He looked at a point slightly above my left shoulder. I got the sense he had rehearsed the conversation, had decided on the exact calibration of it. Enough disclosure to feel ethical, precise enough framing to limit the exchange's liability. He had probably rehearsed it in front of a mirror. The supplemental benefit was simple. The exchange would pay a lump sum against future service hours, essentially in advance, in exchange for a voluntary memory contribution, 1 memory per advance tier. The intake process was straightforward. The medical team was professional and experienced. Procedure was non-invasive and took less than 90 minutes. Reported no significant disruption to daily function within the first month. I asked him what no significant disruption to daily function meant in practice. He adjusted his tie. He said that the literature described the experience as similar to looking at a photograph of an event you could no longer quite recall visiting. The fact was there, the feeling was not. Some participants described a period of mild disorientation. Roughly equivalent, the literature suggested, to the sensation of forgetting where you left a familiar object. Most adjusted quickly. I thanked him and went back to work. I did not go to the intake desk. Not that night, not that week. I thought about my mother. I thought about the wall between what the clinic cost and what I had, and the arithmetic of how long I could hold it at bay with what I was earning. I thought about the machine in the sealed room with its regular breathing pulse. I stood in the empty waiting room at 1 in the morning with my cart and the white light and the faint electrical smell. And I thought about the concept of selling a room that you lived in, whether the house was still a house afterward or just a floor plan. Whether a floor plan was survivable. People lived in floor plans all the time, maybe. Maybe the room wasn't load-bearing. You couldn't tell, from the inside, which ones were. Emre was not there that Thursday. He was there the following one. I brought him coffee again, without thinking about it. He accepted it the same way, the small pause, the 2 careful words. I sat down across from him. This was not something I had planned. My cart was in the corridor. I sat down in one of the waiting room chairs, the good kind with the padded armrests, and I put my hands in my lap and looked at them for a moment. "Can I ask you something?" I said. "Yes," he said. "Do you know what happens to the people who sell? Not what the pamphlet says. Actually, what happens?" He was quiet for a moment. Not the quiet of someone deciding whether to answer. The quiet of someone selecting which true thing to say from several available true things. "They become lighter," he said. "That is how most of them describe it in the first weeks. The weight of the memory is gone. Some of them find that a relief, memories with complicated emotional freight, grief, regret, the residue of relationships that ended badly. Those, when sold, leave a cleanness behind that some sellers experience as liberation, feel untethered from something that was pulling them down. And the others? The others spend years trying to understand why a particular date in their past feels like a door that no longer opens. They stand at the door. They know a room was there. They cannot reconstruct what was in it. Which is it usually? That depends on what they sold," he said, "and on how necessary the room was, structurally, to everything built around it." I looked at my hands. "My mother is sick," I said. "There's a gap between what I have and what it costs. The exchange has a program." "I know," he said. I looked at him. "How do you know?" "I have been coming here for several months," he said. "I notice things. The quality of someone's attention tells you a great deal about what they are carrying." Perk. "You work carefully, and you are here when others are not. And the way you handle yourself on the difficult nights is different from the way you handle yourself on the ordinary ones. The difficult nights have been more frequent recently." I did not know what to do with that. I looked back at my hands. "Program they're offering," I said. "I'm considering it." I wanted to ask someone who might know something about what it actually involves. Everyone in this building talks about it in a particular kind of language that I don't entirely trust. "That is a reasonable instinct," he said. "So what should I know that the language doesn't say?" He considered this for a long moment. The machine behind the wall breathed. The waiting room was very quiet. "What would you sell?" he said. I had thought about that. I had made a list. Not written down, but arranged in my head over several nights of mopping and thinking. Memories that felt like they had less load-bearing function. A summer vacation from age 17 that I could only half reconstruct anyway. The town, the general atmosphere, a few images without a connective tissue between them. A relationship that had ended badly 4 years ago and that I had spent most of those 4 years wanting to feel less about. Birthday party from childhood that existed in my memory as for 3 or 4 isolated moments, without sequence. Things that felt like they were already fading on their own. Selling them seemed almost practical, pleading a process that had already begun. I told him this. He listened without interrupting. When I finished, he was quiet for a moment. "And the one you will not sell," he said. I had not said anything about a memory I would not sell. "Is always one," he said. Not as an accusation, not as a test, as a statement of observed fact. When people make this list, and they all make it, there is always a point near the edge of it where the calculation changes, where the financial logic runs into something that will not move regardless of the numbers. I would like to know what yours is if you're willing to tell me." I did not answer him immediately, because I did not know. I knew exactly. I had reached that point in my list on the 3rd night of thinking about it, and the certainty of it had surprised me. Not the fact of it, but the solidity. How completely, without deliberation, I had understood that it was not for sale, under any circumstances, at any price. My mother, 6 years ago before the diagnosis. See, a kitchen on a Saturday morning in autumn, the light coming for you through the east window at an angle that only happened for a few weeks each year. She was teaching me to make her mother's bread, a recipe she had memorized as a child and never written down because she said the hands knew it better than paper did. You had to feel when the dough was right, she said, and you could not learn that by reading. You had to fail at it and try again. I had failed at it that morning. I had gotten the fold wrong and tried to fix it by pressing too hard, and she had laughed. Not mocking, pure delight. The laugh of someone who has watched this exact mistake be made before, and finds it freshly wonderful every time. The bread had not come out right. The texture was dense and the crust was wrong. We had eaten it anyway, the two of us at the kitchen table, with olive oil, because she said, Good olive oil could salvage most bread mistakes, and the rest you just accepted and ate. I had made that bread every year since. I still could not get it right. I still ate it. The not getting it right was the point. The not getting it right was the continuing conversations between me and a morning that I needed to stay real. There's a morning in my mother's kitchen, I said finally. Before she got sick, we were making bread. It didn't come out right. It doesn't matter. He nodded slowly, as though he had already known or known the shape of it. Keep that one, he said. I wasn't planning to sell it. I know, he said. I'm telling you to keep it anyway, as a fixed point. Whoever else you decide, keep that one fixed. I went to the intake desk in January. I did not sell the bread morning. I sold the summer vacation, the coastal town at 17, which I could only partially reconstruct anyway, which had been fading on its own for years. I sold the bad relationship. 2 years of something complicated and not entirely good and entirely real, which I had spent 4 years wanting to feel differently about. The intake nurse was kind and used the soft, careful language and asked me several times if I was certain, and I said I was certain, and I was. The machine in the sealed room did what the literature said it did. I lay in a reclined chair in a white room, and there were sensors at my temples, and I breathed steadily and felt at a certain point a sensation I cannot describe accurately because it had no prior frame of reference. It was not pain, it was not like falling asleep. The closest I can get is this. Imagine standing in a room and having the room's contents systematically removed while you remain standing. The walls don't change. The light doesn't change. The room still exists as a space. It is simply no longer furnished. I felt afterward 2 distinct absences. One where the vacation had been, which felt like pressing my tongue to the place where a tooth used to be. Identifiable, specific, not painful but persistently noticeable. One where the relationship had been, which felt larger than I had expected. And not only painful, there was a cleanness to part of it. The way they had said there would be. The specific weight of all those unresolved feelings, the anger and the grief and the self-recrimination, was gone. In its place was a kind of blankness that I could not yet assess. I could not tell if it was liberation or just an absence dressed in liberation's clothing. The money covered 4 months of the gap. I went back to work. Emery was in the waiting room the following Thursday. He looked at me for a moment when I came in with my cart. A single, careful look, the kind that reads rather than asks. He did not ask. I did not offer. I brought him coffee and sat down. The bread morning, I said. I didn't. I know, he said. He said it gently. Not as though he had been waiting for the confirmation. As though the confirmation settled something he had been patient about for a long time. The others, I said. The ones I did sell. I know they're gone. I know the fact of them is still there. I can tell you the relationship lasted from when I was 23 to 25. I can tell you the coastal town was in the north. I can tell you the general shape of both of those things. I can't. I stopped. It's like knowing a room existed in a house you grew up in. You know the door was there. You can describe the door. You cannot remember what the room looked like inside, what it smelled like, what happened in it. Yes, he said. Is that permanent? Yes, he said. In the absence of restoration, which we can discuss separately, yes. What was extracted was the substance of the memory. The fact is a residue. The residue does not regenerate. I sat with that for a moment. Was it worth it, he asked. 4 months, I said. Then, I'll have to decide again. He looked toward the sealed room at the end of the hall. The machine breathed. There are other ways to cover the gap, he said. I want you to know that. Not because your choice was wrong. Because the choice will come again, and I would prefer the field to be wider when it does. I looked at him. What other ways? He reached into the inside pocket of his coat, the same good coat every Thursday, and set a card on the armrest between us. It was thick paper, the color of old ivory. On it was an address, just a street and a number, and below the address, in very small print, a single line. Recollection, restoration, and preservation. By appointment. There are people, he said, who believe that what this place does should be reversible, that a memory extracted is not a memory destroyed, only a memory displaced, that the extracted substance retains the original neural signature, that with sufficient precision and sufficient access to the archive, it can be returned to the mind it was taken from. I picked up the card. Is that true? I said. It is not settled science, he said, but it is not nothing. There have been documented restorations. The clinic at this address has done 14. In 12 of those cases, the subject reported complete or near-complete restoration of the extracted memory. In 2, partial, and the failure rate, no documented case of adverse outcome beyond the expected disorientation of reintegration, he said, which is real, and which should not be minimized but which is temporary. I turned the card over. There was a phone number on the back, smaller than not the address on the front. I had not noticed it initially. Why are you telling me this? I said. Because in 4 months the gap will exist again, he said, and I would prefer you to have more options than the exchanges program when it does. I put the card in my pocket. I finished my shift. I thought about it for 3 days. Then I called the number. The address was a research clinic in a converted industrial building 2 kilometers from the harbor. From the outside, it looked like a building that had been other things before it was. This, the bones of something manufacturing visible in the high ceilings and the industrial windows, now occupied by equipment racks and workstations, and the kind of organized clutter that accumulates in a place where people are doing serious work without sufficient budget. It did not look like much. Inside, it was quieter than I expected, and more substantial in its equipment than the exterior suggested. The woman who met me at the door was small, and moved with a precision that suggested she had learned early to waste nothing, not motion, not words, not time. She introduced herself as Dr. Vasquez without accompanying warmth, and showed me to a chair and explained what the clinic did without preamble. Memory extraction, she said, was predicated on a specific encoding sequence, a neural signature unique to the architecture of the original mind. What the exchange sold was not the raw signature, but a formatted version of it, processed for compatibility with recipient minds. The processing was Laslady in certain dimensions. But the original signature was not destroyed in the extraction, persisted in the substrate the exchange held in its cold storage archive. If you could access the substrate, if you could physically recover what the exchange stored, restoration was possible. Sure, the original signature could be reintegrated into the source neural architecture. The room could be returned to the house. You said 14 restorations, I said. 14 confirmed, she said. We are limited by access to the exchange's archive. They classify extracted substrates as their property and do not release them. The 14 we have restored were acquired through alternative channels. What kind of alternative channels? She looked at me with something that was not quite clinical neutrality anymore. We have had in the past a person inside the exchange, she said. In the cleaning staff, someone with after-hours access to the 15th floor who could physically retrieve specific substrates from the cold storage archive. When we identified clients who wished restoration. Had, I said. Previous person left 8 months ago, she said. The position is currently held by someone who does not know what they could be doing. I sat with that for a moment. The clinic's equipment hummed quietly. Outside the high windows, the city was going about its morning. Emmer sent me, I said. Yes, she said. He could have told me this directly. He could have, she said. He chose not to. I believe that was deliberate. I understood then, sitting in that chair in that clinic, in that converted building, why Emery had been in the waiting room for 11 months, what he had been waiting for, what he had been watching. I went back to Emery the following Thursday. Could have told me, I said, before I sat down. I could have, he said. I chose to let you find it. Why? He was quiet for a moment. The select thing, the true thing quiet I had come to recognize. People who are recruited into a thing rarely sustain it the way people who choose it do, he said. The decision to go to the clinic was yours. The decision to call the number was yours. I provided a card. I did not explain the card. The space between the card and the clinic, that was yours to cross. And if I hadn't, then you would not have been the right person, he said. Simply, not cruelly. I sat down. I put my hands in my lap. Tell me what the work involves, I said. Specifically. He told me specifically. The exchange archived extracted substrates in a cold storage room on the 15th floor, adjacent to the mechanical room where the main extraction equipment was housed. The archive was cataloged by client intake number. Access required a staff keycard and a secondary pin that rotated on a weekly basis. The clinic had a contact inside the exchange. a junior archivist named Tomas, whose reasons were his own, who provided the weekly pin. What they lacked was someone with legitimate after-hours access to the 15th floor who could physically retrieve specific substrates when the clinic identified a restoration client. The physical act of retrieval was simple. The substrates were small, approximately the size and weight of a medicine vial, and the cold storage unit was an indexed cabinet rather than a secure vault. Once inside the room, with the pin and the intake number, retrieval took under 2 minutes. The risk was real. Unauthorized access to the archive. Removal of property the exchange claimed legal title to. The legal status of extracted substrates was contested in ongoing litigation in several jurisdictions, which meant the exchange's title claim was not settled law. But that would not protect me from suspension or dismissal or potential civil action if I was caught. And the restoration clients, I said, how do you find them? Referral networks, he said. Former clients who speak to others. Medical professionals who have observed post-extraction loss in patients and know what caused it. Travels slowly, but it travels. And my own memories, I said. The ones I sold to the exchange. They're in the archive. Yes, he said. We know the intake numbers. They would be among the first retrieved. I looked at my hands. My mother's treatment, I said. The gap. If I'm doing this, instead of using the exchange's program, I need the gap covered another way. The clinic compensates for this work, he said, and substantially. The risk you would be taking is real, and it will be treated as such. I nodded. And you, I said. What is your role in this? Not the organizing of it. What are you, actually? You've been in this waiting room for almost a year. You're not a client. You're not a contractor. What are you? He looked at me for a long moment. The machine in the sealed room breathed. People, he said. Have a concept that does not translate cleanly. The closest your language comes is something like the keeper of what must not be forgotten. There are things that must be held. Not because they are useful or productive or financially categorizable, because they are true, because a life that has lost its true things is not a life. It is an accounting, a series of entries in a ledger that has lost its meaning. He set his hands on the armrests. The scaled, bronze skin caught the waiting room's white light. I have been watching this building for a long time, he said. Watching what it does, and what the law does not do about it, and what individual human beings choose when the pressure reaches a certain level. Most choose to sell. I do not hold that against them. Pressure is real, and the choice is made in impossible circumstances. But occasionally, he stopped. Occasionally someone reaches the edge of their list, he said, and pulls back. And then, a few months later, when the circumstances have worsened rather than improved, does something harder and more costly than selling, something that is not about their own loss anymore. And that's what you've been waiting for, I said. That is who I have been waiting for, he said. Yes. The work was slow and required patience I had not known I possessed in that quantity. The first 3 weeks I changed nothing. I needed the rhythm to feel unbroken, to anyone watching, to the security systems, to myself. I needed to know the 15th floor the way I knew my own apartment, where the cameras pointed, where the angles went dead, which doors had the longest lag on the latch, which of the night staff came back after hours and when and for how long. David worked late on Tuesdays, reliably until 11. The security guard rotated between the 14th and 15th floors on a cycle I had memorized within 8 days. The secondary entrance from the west stairwell had a camera that swept left and held for 4 seconds before returning to center. Enough time to pass if you moved without hesitation. The cold storage room was at the far end of the 15th floor's inner corridor, behind 2 standard doors and 1 keypad. PIN changed on Mondays. Tomas provided it before midnight each week, disguised as item entries in a shared messaging thread we used. A shopping list format. The items meaningless. The PIN encoded in the quantity fields of the 3rd and 6th entries. First retrieval took 11 minutes from keycard swipe to exit. 3 substrates. 3 specific intake numbers the clinic had identified from restoration clients who had made contact that month. I was back on my cleaning route in time for David to see me mopping the east corridor when he emerged from his office at midnight on his way to the elevator. Said good night. I said good night. The substrates were in my cart's cleaning supply compartment, wrapped in cloth. Over 4 months I retrieved 19 substrates. Not all of them were mine. Most were strangers. The clinic's referral network grew slowly. Word passed between people who had sold under financial duress and spent the years since standing at doors in themselves that no longer opened. Retired schoolteacher named Helena, who had sold her wedding morning to cover a legal debt, and had not been able to understand since why the third week of May produced in her an inexplicable grief. A young man who had sold the memory of his father teaching him to swim, sold it for the first year's tuition at a technical school, and had spent 3 years unable to explain why the smell of chlorine produced in him a specific and sourceless sadness, a missing that had no identifiable object. I retrieved their substrates. I carried them to the clinic in my bag, on the train, wrapped carefully, stored at the clinic's temperature specifications. Dr. Vask did what she did. The restorations held. When I retrieved my own, the vacation and the relationship, I sat in Dr. Vasquez's clinic on a Tuesday afternoon and held the 2 small sealed containers and understood that what was inside them was something I had agreed to be without, and that getting it back did not unmake the agreement, and that this was fine. This was, in fact, the ordinary complexity of a decision made under pressure that turned out to have an alternative resolution. You did not have to have made the right choice for the thing to come right in the end. The two things were not the same. Reintegration took an hour. Sensors at my temples, breathing steadily. The sensation when it came was the one I would later describe to restoration clients sitting in this same chair. The window opening feeling. Not dramatic, not cinematic. Just air suddenly where there had been a sealed room. I remembered the coastal town, 17 years old. The light on the water in the evenings. The sound of the crowds on the promenade. The smell of fried food from the stalls along the boardwalk. The particular blue of the sky in the north in late summer that you do not see anywhere else. The feeling of being briefly free in a way that only exists at 17. Before the weight of specific responsibility settles. Before you understand that freedom is always borrowed against something. The memory was not perfect. There were soft places. Gaps where the substrate had degraded in storage, but the room was there again. The light was in it, the smell was in it, I was inside it. I remembered the relationship. 2 years. Complicated and not entirely good and entirely real, in the way of things that matter and do not resolve cleanly. First months, when it was easy and new. The middle months, when it was harder and more honest. The ending, which had been neither party's finest hour, and which had left a specific kind of grief that was not only loss but also relief, and which I had spent the 4 subsequent years wanting to feel less about, and now felt simply as what it was, a thing that had happened and mattered and was finished. Grief and the relief were both back. I felt their appropriate weight, which was not crushing and was not nothing. It was the correct weight. The weight the experience had earned. I cried for about 10 minutes in Dr. Vasquez's clinic. She handed me a glass of water and did not say anything, which was the right call. Some moments do not benefit from language. Then I went home and made bread. The exchange discovered the archive access in the 5th month. Not through the cameras. An internal audit of the substrate inventory, a quarterly reconciliation of catalog numbers against physical units in cold storage that flagged 19 gaps, sequential access periods, consistent timing, a pattern that pointed to a single actor with a specific access profile. David called me into his office on a Wednesday afternoon. 2 people I had not seen before. The exchange's legal and security division, a man and a woman who dressed the same and spoke in the same careful, measured register as the intake pamphlets. They were not hostile. They were precise. They asked me questions I answered. Truthfully where I could and answered with silence where I could not. They showed me the access logs. They showed me the timeline. They had not found Tomas yet. I could tell from the specificity of their questions that they had identified a cleaning staff access pattern and had not yet traced the pin's source. They did not have evidence sufficient for criminal referral. The legal woman told me evenly. The statutory status of extracted substrates as property was contested in active litigation in 3 jurisdictions. The exchange's claim of ownership was not settled law and had been explicitly challenged in 1 pending case. This did not mean they could not pursue civil claims. And it did not mean they would not. It meant the situation was, legally speaking, complicated. What they could do and did was suspend me. David walked me out. He did not look at me in the elevator. On the lobby level, he stopped and looked at the water feature for a moment. "I'm sorry," he said. He said it quietly, to the water feature. "You did your job," I said. He looked at me then. He had the expression of a man who had been telling himself something for a long time that he was no longer entirely sure was true. "Program," he said. "The supplemental benefit. I know what people give for it. I have known for a long time." "I know you have," I said. I went out through the lobby, sat on a bench by the harbor and looked at the water. The building rose behind me, glass and light, 14 and 15 floors of sealed rooms where other people's rooms used to be. My phone buzzed. "Thomas, they found two." "I'm sorry," I texted back. "Don't apologize." "Shit. You did something real." I sat on the bench for a while. The sky was gray and the light was low, and I was not sorry, which I had expected to feel more complicated about than I did. I did not see him for 6 weeks, the clinic continued. Tomas was out, but Isabella, whose name I had not known until after my suspension, was still inside, a senior records archivist, 7 years at the exchange, who had spent the last 3 maintaining a private log of everything she had witnessed and had no way to act on alone. She did not provide substrates. She provided documentation. I helped with intake, with the client interviews that Dr. Vasquez used to build the legal record, with the careful cataloging of losses and restorations. Helena, the school teacher, had her wedding morning restored in the 3rd week of December. She called the clinic the day after to ask to speak to whoever had retrieved it. Dr. Vasquez gave her my number. She talked for 20 minutes. She talked about the 3rd week of May and what it had felt like to carry that grief every year without being able to name it or trace it to its source. To feel a loss so specific that it must have a location, and to be unable to find the location, and to have given up eventually on finding it, and decided it was simply some generalized sadness of aging that everyone experienced and nobody spoke about. She talked about her husband, who was still living, and about a dress she had not thought about in 4 years, and about a look on his face on their wedding morning that she had not been able to access in her memory of him for all that time, and about how she had told him the night before what had happened and what she had recovered, and they had sat at their kitchen table together and cried for the first time in a very long time, not from grief, from the particular relief of a room being returned to you. I am reporting this because it needs to be part of the record. The school teacher's name was Helena. What the exchange took from her was priced at 83 units in their internal system, which corresponded to a lump sum that covered 6 months of a legal debt now fully repaid. What was returned to her was a mourning and a dress, and the way her husband had looked at her. I have tried many times to find a scale on which those things sit in any kind of equivalence. I have not found it. I do not think such a scale exists. Emery came to the clinic on a Thursday in February. I was at the intake desk when he arrived, and he looked the same as he always had. Broad and still and unhurried, the scaled bronze skin, the good coat. And he sat in the chair across from my desk and looked at me with the quality of attention I had spent almost a year learning to read. "You were suspended," he said. "Yes. Are you all right?" "Yes," I considered. "The work isn't finished." "I'm all right." He looked around the clinic, at the equipment, at the documentation. Chart on the wall, showing 33 restoration cases completed, 33 rooms returned to the houses they had been taken from. 3, he said. So far. He was quiet for a long time. When he spoke again, there was something different in the register. Not the voice itself, but the weight behind it, as though the room he was speaking from had expanded. "I want to tell you something I did not tell you before," he said. "I described my people's concept to you, the keeper of what must not be forgotten. I said it as a description of a role. I want to tell you now what it actually means, and why I was in that waiting room for almost a year, and why the answer to the question you asked months ago, why me, is what I am about to tell you." I put down the intake form. "Where I come from," he said, "memory is not metaphor. It is not a figure of speech or a poetic way of describing continuity. Memory is material. It is the substance that holds a life into its particular shape. When it is systematically removed, The shape does not simply feel different. It begins to dissolve. Slowly, across years, the person does not cease to function, does not collapse. They become progressively lighter in a way that is not liberation. They become an outline of a person. The contents are missing and the house stands, but the house is emptying. He looked at the wall chart. The exchange is not running a financial service, he said. It is running a process of erosion. It is trading in the dissolution of people, at market rates, with the documentation structured to ensure legal insulation. It does not know this about itself, or it knows and has priced it into the acceptable parameters memo and moved on. Either way, the outcome is the same. Others, like you, I said. You mentioned them. Yes, not many, not nearby. They have been watching this building, and others like it in other cities, for 2 years. Watching what the law does not do, and what individuals choose, and whether the pattern will shift. And? The pattern does not shift without a person in it who shifts it, he said. The litigation your clinic is building, it needs something it does not currently have. The internal documentation. The exchange's own records of post-extraction adverse outcomes. The internal communications showing that the harm was understood and categorized and filed. We know Isabella has this material. She has been waiting for someone she could trust to carry it legally, anonymously enough to protect her, precisely enough to be admissible. And she'll work with me, I said. It was not quite a question. She already has been, he said. She has been watching the clinic's legal record develop for 4 months. She knows the documentation standard, Dr. Vasquez is working toward. She is ready. She was waiting for someone to ask. I looked at my hands, then at him. Why are you here? I said. Not why are you telling me this? Why are you in this room? You have been the watcher, the observer, the person in the waiting room reading the paper document. Why are you sitting across from me in the clinic now? He was quiet for a moment. Because I have been wrong, he said, about what keeping means. I thought keeping meant watching, witnessing, maintaining a presence at the edge of the thing without entering it. I thought that was the correct posture, the observer who does not distort what is observed. He paused. What I have watched, for 2 years, is people being harmed in a building I was sitting in, and I sat in the waiting room reading documents. And that is not keeping. That is witnessing while the house empties. He looked at me directly. I want to be in the room, he said. When you meet with Isabella, I want to be part of the work, not the observation of it. I am telling you this, because the decision should be yours. You are the one running the risk. You are the one who has earned the position to decide who is in the room. I am asking. I looked at him for a long moment. Thursday, I said, I'll set up the meeting. You'll be there. Isabella was a small woman who held herself with the compressed energy of someone who has been carrying a significant weight for a long time and has learned to walk normally under it. She had worked at the exchange for 7 years. She had begun keeping her private log in the 3rd year when she had processed the appeal of a client who wanted their memory returned and had been directed by her supervisor to file the appeal in the category labeled non-actionable, without review. The log was on a drive she had been maintaining at home, encrypted, backed up in 3 locations. She set it on the table in Dr. Vasquez's clinic and looked at it for a moment before she spoke. 241 documents, she said. Internal pricing memos. Post-extraction outcome assessments with adverse outcome flags. The acceptable parameters memo. The one where they formally determined that significant experiential loss in sellers was within acceptable parameters and did not require protocol adjustment. Internal communications between the medical director and the executive team about the litigation risk of full disclosure to sellers. The disclosure script revision histories. You can track, across 14 drafts, the progressive removal of language that would have given sellers a clearer understanding of the extent of the loss. She was controlled and precise, and she cried once, briefly, when she read us the acceptable parameters memo, the exact language of it. She had it memorized. She had been reading it in her own head for 2 years. She wiped her face and kept talking. We sat there for 5 hours, the 4 of us, me, Emre, Dr. Vasquez, Isabella, and the 241 documents spread across the table. Emre did not speak much. He listened. He asked 3 questions across 5 hours, each of them exactly the right question, each of them opening a part of the documentation. that needed to be more fully understood before the legal team received it. At the end, when Isabella had said what she needed to say, she looked at the table and was quiet for a moment. "I want to know," she said, "if this will matter. I have been sitting on this for 3 years. I have been trying to determine whether there is a version of the world in which an internal archivist private log changes anything. I have not been able to convince myself." "It won't be the log alone," Dr. Vasquez said. "It will be the log and the clinical cases and the legal framework the litigation team has been building, and the testimony of restoration clients and Marin's testimony. The log is the inside of the building. Everything else is the outside. Together they are a case." Isabella looked at the drive on the table. "All right," she said. "The litigation team took the documents 3 days later. I want to be precise about what happened after, because the story that was eventually told is not exactly the story that was lived. The story told: a landmark whistleblower case. A major financial firm's memory extraction practice challenged in court. Ruling not a ban, but a reclassification. Memory extraction classified as an irrevocable major medical procedure, requiring independent psychological assessment, a 48-hour waiting period, and mandatory disclosure of the full documented range of post-extraction experiential loss. The extracted substrate archive reclassified as a trust, not a commodity, subject to restoration claims by original donors for 20 years from the date of extraction. The story lived. Forts of slow and difficult legal process, a great deal of documentation, many days when nothing moved. Some when it moved wrong. The exchange's legal team was very good. The depositions were long. The cross-examinations of Dr. Vasquez and Helena and the young man who had sold his father's swimming lesson were conducted with a focused precision that was not cruel, but was not gentle. I testified for 3 hours. Isabella testified for 4, with the exchange's lawyers trying for the first 2 to establish that her log was produced in bad faith and failing because Dr. Vasquez's legal team had built the documentation foundation carefully enough that the log corroborated rather than led. It held. The cases held. The standard changed not enough. That is the honest accounting. The ruling changed the conditions under which the exchange operates, not the exchange's existence. There are still people who sell under pressure. There are still closed doors in people. The disclosure requirements are better. The waiting period is real. The restoration claim window is real. None of this is a complete solution. I'm not interested in describing it as one, but it is not nothing. I am also not interested in describing it as nothing. On the last day of testimony, I sat in the corridor outside the courtroom on a wooden bench, and Emre sat beside me. We'd been in the building since the 7 in the morning, and it was now late afternoon, and I was very tired in the specific way of people who have been careful for a long time. "When this is over," I said, "what do you do?" "Watch," he said. "As I have always done." From a waiting room, he was quiet. "I told you I had been wrong about what keeping means," he said. "Did? I am still working out what the correct posture is. Whether there is a way to be present in a thing without entering it so fully that the thing changes shape because of your presence. I do not have a resolved answer." "I don't think that's the kind of question that resolves," I said. "I think you just keep asking it and adjusting." He looked at me with the expression I had come to recognize as his version of amusement. Small, deep, as though the humor was located somewhere a long way in. "Fred," he said. "Does it come out right yet?" "No," I said. "Never. I've been making it for 7 years and it never comes out right." "But you make it." "Every year," I said. "Tch, that's beside the point. Whether it comes out right is beside the point." "Yes," he said, with the weight he put in those 2 words. "That is exactly the point." The courtroom doors opened. We went back in. My mother recovered. Slowly, imperfectly, in the way of real recovery, rather than the kind that happens in a single afternoon in a film. It accumulated over months in increments, so small you could not see them from inside, but could see clearly from a year's distance. Phone calls that went 20 minutes instead of 10, mornings where she dressed before noon, a Saturday in October, when she stood in her kitchen, and we made the bread together, and it came out wrong, and we ate it with olive oil, and did not care. Shh. I work for the clinic now. Full-time, intake and documentation, and the client interviews, and the hours I spend sitting with people who have just had a restoration and need the first minutes to orient. To understand what has come back, to sit in the strange specific feeling of air in a sealed room. Do not say much in those minutes. I stay, it is enough to stay. Emery comes to the clinic on Thursdays. He sits in the waiting room and reads his paper documents and occasionally looks toward the restoration room at the end of the hall. When I am not occupied, I bring him coffee. He accepts it the same way he always has. The pause, the two words. Thank you. You're welcome. We do not make more of it than it is. We do not need to. I have thought a great deal in the years since about what he is, about what it meant to have been watched with that quality of attention for that long, by something that understood from a very great distance what I would choose before I understood it myself. I have not resolved it. It is not the kind of thing that resolves. What I know is this. There is a bread morning in me that I did not sell. A kitchen in autumn. A Saturday. The light at the angle it only reaches for a few weeks a year. Flour on my mother's forearms. A recipe that lives in the hands better than on paper. A laugh when I got the fold wrong. Bread that never comes out right. Bread I make anyway. Every year, 'cause the making is the conversation, and the conversation does not require the bread to be good. I hold that morning, not because it is useful, not because it is financially productive or categorizable or advantageous to hold, because it is true. Because a life that loses its true things is not a life. It is an accounting, a floor plan of a house, entries in a ledger that has lost its meaning. You hold what is true. That is the work. That is what must not be forgotten. I keep it.